was setting, and the sight was so ravishing she could barely describe it. The whole sky had been a blaze of gold, she said, and as for the clouds, she couldn't find words to capture their beauty as they sailed over her head, streaked with crimson and violet. A skein of wild swans had flown into the setting sun, as if drawing a white veil across the water. She had swum after them, but as the sun sank, so the vision of sea, sky, and cloud had faded. The third of the sisters was the most daring of them all. She swam right inland up a broad river. She saw green hills covered with vines, castles, and farms hidden in the forest. She heard the birds singing, and the sun was so hot that she was often forced to dive back under water to cool her burning face. In a small cove, she had come upon a group of human children splashing in the water, quite naked, but when she tried to play with them, they ran off in alarm. Then a little black animal, it was a dog, but she didn't know that, had come and barked at her so furiously that she took fright and headed out to sea. But she would never forget those magnificent woods and green hills and those sweet little children who tried to swim in the water, even though they had no tails. The fourth sister was not so bold. She stayed well away from shore, and she said that there wasn't anything more beautiful than the open sea, with nothing for miles around, and the sky above like a great glass bell. She had seen ships, but so far away they looked like seagulls. They had swum with the dolphins, who had turned somersaults for her, and the huge whales had sprayed jets of water into the air like so many fountains. The fifth sister's birthday fell in winter, so she saw something none of her sisters had seen. The sea looked quite green, and great icebergs were floating in it. They looked like pearls, yet each one was larger than a church tower. They had the strangest shapes, and they sparkled like diamonds. She had seated herself on one of the largest, and all the sailors had stared away in fear as they sailed past the iceberg, where she sat with her long hair streaming in the wind. By evening, a storm was blowing. The dark waves lifted the icebergs high up, and lightning flashed red on the ice. The ships had furled their sails and waited out the storm in terror, while she sat calmly on her iceberg and watched the blue lightning zigzag into the glittering sea. The first time any of the sisters was allowed to go to the surface, she was always delighted to see so many things that were new and beautiful. But when they were older and could go any time they liked, they soon lost interest. They wanted to be back home. The bottom of the ocean was the most beautiful place of all. Still, many an evening the five sisters would link arms and rise to the surface together. They had lovely voices, more hauntingly beautiful than any human voice. And when a storm was blowing and they thought ships might be wrecked, they would swim in front of them and sing about all the wonders waiting at the bottom of the sea. Their songs told the sailors not to be afraid of coming down, but the sailors could not make out the words in the howling storm, nor did they ever see any of the delights of which the princesses sang, for when the ship sank, the crew were drowned, and they came only as dead men to the palace of the Sea King. When the sisters floated up to the surface like this, arm in arm, their little sister stayed behind all alone. As she watched them go, she would have cried, but a mermaid has no tears, and so she suffers all the more. If only I were 15, she sighed. I know that I shall love the world up there and the people who live in it. And then at last she was 15. There now, we're getting you off our hands at last, said her old grandmother. Let me dress you up like your sisters. She set a garland of white lilies in her hair. Each petal was half a pearl. Then she made 8 big oysters pinch fast onto her tail to show that she was a princess. Ow, that hurts, said the little mermaid. One must suffer to be beautiful, said her grandmother. The little mermaid would have gladly swapped her heavy garland of pearls for some of the red flowers from her garden, which suited her much better, but she didn't dare. Goodbye, she said, and she floated up through the waters as lightly as a bubble. The sun had just set when she lifted her head above the water. The clouds still gleamed rose and gold, and in the pale pink sky the evening star shone clear and bright. The air was soft and fresh, and the sea was perfectly calm. A 3-masted ship lay close by. Only one sail was set because there wasn't a breath of wind. The sailors were sitting idly in the rigging. Below on the deck there was music and singing, and as the evening grew dark, hundreds of lanterns were lit, like so many flags. The little mermaid slammed to a porthole, and the waves lifted her up so that she could see the smartly dressed people inside. The handsomest of all was a young prince with jet black eyes. This was his 16th birthday, and that was the cause of the celebrations. The sailors were dancing up on the deck, and when the young prince appeared, 100 rockets shot up into the sky and turned the night back into bright day. The little mermaid was quite scared and ducked back beneath the water, but she soon surfaced again. It felt as if the stars were falling out of the sky. She had never seen such fireworks. Great suns were spinning around, fiery fish were darting about the blue air, and all this glitter was reflected back from the clear mirror of the sea. The deck of the ship was so brightly lit that you could see every rope. How handsome the young prince was! He was laughing and smiling and shaking hands with everybody, while music rang out into the night. It grew late, but the little mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship and the handsome prince. The lanterns were put out, the rockets were finished, no more cannons were fired, yet deep beneath the sea there was murmuring and grumbling. Still the mermaid rocked up and down on the waves to look into the cabin. The ship gathered speed. More sails were unfurled. The waves became choppy, and clouds began to amass. In the distance there were flashes of lightning. A storm was brewing. The sails were taken in, and the ship was tossed about by the huge waves that rose like black mountains high above the masts. The ship was like a swan diving down into the troughs of the waves and riding high on their crests. The little mermaid watched it all with glee. She thought it was great fun, but it was no joke for the sailors. The ship creaked and cracked, and its stout timbers shivered as the raging sea pounded against them. Suddenly, the mainmast snapped like a stick, and then the ship keeled over on her side as water poured into the hold. Now the little mermaid could see that they were in danger. she herself had to watch out for planks and bits of wreckage.